The morning sun cast long shadows through the dense forest of Verdania. Prime, as Lieutenant Taman checked his equipment one last time. His plasma rifle hummed softly at his side, fully charged and ready. The energy scanner in his left hand beeped, steadily tracking the strange readings that had brought his team to this remote sector. Energy signature is getting stronger. He spoke into his unit. We should reach the source within the hour. Two voices crackled back through the static. Communications Specialist Hyjin responded first from her position 20 meters to his left. Copy that, Lieutenant. All channels are clear. No interference from the anomaly yet. Medic Boram's voice came from the right flank. Biosigns are normal. Air quality is good. Whatever is generating these readings, it is not affecting the environment in any obvious way. Taman nodded and moved forward through the thick undergrowth. The trees here were ancient, their trunks wider than small buildings and their canopy so dense that little sunlight reached the forest floor. Strange blue moss covered most surfaces, giving the whole area an otherworldly glow. The Terran Colonial Survey Corps had been studying Verdania Prime for 6 months. Most of the planet seemed safe for human settlement. Rolling grasslands, clean rivers, and abundant wildlife made it ideal for a new colony. But this forest remained a mystery. Satellite scans showed massive energy readings deep within its heart, but no previous team had been able to reach the source. Lieutenant Hyjin's voice carried a note of concern. I am picking up movement on the motion sensors, multiple contacts moving parallel to our position. Timon stopped and raised his hand, signaling for silence. The forest around them had grown quiet, no bird calls, no rustling leaves, even the constant buzz of insects had ceased. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. How many contacts? He whispered into his At least 6, maybe more. They are staying just outside sensor range, but they are definitely tracking us. Bioram's voice joined the conversation. Could be the local wildlife. We saw those deer-like creatures yesterday. Maybe they are curious about us. Taman was not convinced. His combat experience told him they were being hunted, not observed. Change of plans? We form up in triangle formation. Hyjin, take point. Bioram, watch our 6. We move fast, but careful. The team regrouped quickly. Taman took the center. Position his rifle ready. They moved through the forest with practiced efficiency. But the feeling of being watched never left them. The energy readings grew stronger with each step. Taman's scanner began to emit a high-pitched whine. Whatever was generating these signals was close now. Very close. Their Hyjin pointed ahead to a clearing where the trees opened up. The readings are coming from that direction. They approached the edge of the clearing cautiously. What they saw made them stop and wonder. In the center of the open space stood a structure unlike anything in their databases. It was not built by human hands, but it was clearly artificial. Smooth curves of what looked like living metal twisted upward into a spiral tower. The surface pulsed with soft light that matched the rhythm of the energy readings. Alien technology, Bioram breathed. This is the discovery of the century. Taman felt excitement and fear in equal measure. First contact protocols were clear, but they had been written for controlled situations, not for finding abandoned alien structures in the middle of nowhere. We document everything, he decided. Full scans, photos, samples if possible. But we do not touch anything until we understand what we are dealing with. Hyjin was already setting up her equipment. When the attack came, the first creature burst from the undergrowth without warning. It was massive, easily, twice the size of Earth's largest wolves, but built like a killing machine. Its fur was dark as night, and metallic claws gleamed in the dim light. Rows of sharp teeth filled a mouth that could easily crush a human skull. Training kicked in. His rifle was up and firing before his conscious mind fully processed the threat. The plasma bolt struck the creature's center mass, dropping it instantly. But more were coming. Contact left, Hyjin shouted, her own weapon spitting fire. 2 more beasts charged from the tree line, their howls echoing through the forest. Bioram spun to face the rear, as predicted. 3 more creatures emerged from behind them, moving with deadly coordination. These were not wild animals hunting for food. They were intelligent predators executing a planned ambush. The battle was fierce but brief. Taman's rifle cut down to more attackers, but there were too many of them. One of the beasts, larger than the others, slammed into Hai-Jin from the side. Her scream cut through the air as metallic claws tore through her armor. Hai-Jin turned to help her, but 3 more creatures were already on him. He rolled aside as massive jaws snapped where his head had been a moment before. Bjorn was fighting desperately, his medical training no match for the creature's speed and strength. Taemin watched in horror as the medic disappeared under a pile of snarling beasts. Pain exploded through Taemin's left shoulder as claws raked across his back. He spun and fired point-blank into his attacker's face, but the effort cost him his balance. Another creature's paw struck his right leg, and he heard the bone crack. Gasping in pain, Taemin dragged himself toward the edge of the clearing. His rifle was nearly empty, and more creatures were emerging from the forest. He could see Hai-Jin's still form 20 meters away, could hear Bjorn's final cries growing weaker. With his last burst of strength, Taemin crawled toward a jumble of rocks at the clearing's edge. If he was going to die, he would make his last stand there. Blood loss was making him dizzy, but he forced himself to keep moving. The creatures followed him, their glowing eyes reflecting the alien structure's pulsing light. They moved slowly now, confident in their victory. Taemin managed to reach the rocks and prop himself against the largest stone. His rifle had 2 shots left. As the pack leader approached, Taemin raised his weapon one final time. The creature's intelligent eyes seemed to mock him, as if it understood his desperation. But then something changed. The pack leader's ears twitched, and it turned to look into the forest behind Taemin. The other creatures followed its gaze, their aggressive postures shifting to something that looked almost like fear from the shadows between the ancient trees. Golden eyes watched the scene unfold. Something large moved in the darkness, something the pack recognized and respected. The creatures began to back away, their hunt forgotten in the face of a greater presence. Taemin felt consciousness slipping away as blood loss took its toll. His last clear thought was wonder at the sight of those golden eyes. Watching him with an intelligence that seemed ancient and wise dot in the deep forest, the Watcher made its decision. The creature in the shadows had watched many hunts in its 3 centuries of life. It had seen prey animals flee in terror, predators claim their kills, and the endless cycle of survival play out beneath the ancient trees, but never had it witnessed anything like the battle that had just ended in the clearing. The golden-eyed being stepped forward on massive paws, each step silent despite its size. It stood as tall as the old earth horses from the human databases, but moved with the fluid grace of a hunting cat. Bioluminescent markings ran along its spine, pulsing with a soft blue light that matched the rhythm of its heartbeat. The local creatures knew it as a Veil Walker, one of the ancient guardians of the deep forest. The pack of metal-clawed hunters sensed its approach and retreated quickly into the undergrowth. Even in their victory, they knew better than to challenge one of the old ones. The Veil Walker had earned its reputation over centuries of silent rule in these woods as the sounds of the departing pack faded. The forest guardian approached the scene of battle. It moved with careful steps around the bodies of the fallen humans, studying each one with ancient intelligence. The female with the communication devices had died quickly. The male who carried medical supplies had fought bravely, but was overwhelmed. Both had shown courage in their final moments, but it was the third human that caught the Veil Walker's attention. The one called Taemin still breathed, though barely. Blood soaked his torn uniform, and his broken leg lay at an odd angle. Yet, even in his unconscious state, his hand still gripped his weapon. More importantly, his final actions had not been to save himself. The Veil Walker's enhanced senses could read the story written in scent and disturbed earth. When the attack began, this human had positioned himself to protect his companions. Even when wounded and facing certain death, he had tried to reach the fallen female. His last conscious act had been to drag himself toward her body, not toward safety. This behavior puzzled the ancient creature. In 300 years of observation, it had seen countless species react to mortal danger. The strong survived by abandoning the weak. The clever escaped while others died. But this small, fragile being had chosen differently. He had chosen to die with his pack rather than live without them. The Veil Walker circled the wounded human, slowly, its golden eyes never leaving his face. Taemin's breathing was shallow and irregular. Without medical attention, he would be dead before the next sunrise. The logical choice was to let nature take its course, as it always had. The forest would reclaim the bodies, and life would continue as it had for millennia. But something about the human sacrifice bothered the Guardian. In its long life, the Veil Walker had developed its own code of honor. Strength was important, but courage was rare. Intelligence mattered, but wisdom was precious. This dying human had shown all these qualities in his final moments. The bioluminescent markings along the creature's spine began to pulse faster, reflecting its internal struggle. For 3 centuries, it had followed the ancient ways. Veil Walkers did not interfere with the natural order. They watched, they protected the deep places of the forest, but they did not intervene in the struggles of other species. Yet here was a being who had broken his own species' natural law of self-preservation. If a human could choose honor over survival, perhaps an ancient guardian could choose compassion over tradition. The Veil Walker made its decision. Moving with surprising gentleness for such a large creature, it approached the unconscious human. Its sensitive nose detected the scent of infection beginning in the wounds. Time was running short. The nearest human settlement was 3 days' journey through treacherous terrain. Even for a Veil Walker, it would be a difficult trip. While carrying additional weight, the creature lowered itself carefully beside Taemin's still form. Its thick fur was softer than it appeared, evolved over centuries to provide warmth in the forests, cool nights. The bioluminescent markings along its back dimmed to a gentle glow, enough to provide light, but not enough to attract unwanted attention. With movements as precise as a surgeon's, the Veil Walker used its teeth to tear strips of fabric from the human's uniform. It had watched enough injured animals over the years to understand basic wound care. The bleeding had to be controlled first, then the broken bones stabilized for transport. The Guardian's saliva contained natural antibiotics, developed through evolution, to keep its own wounds clean. It carefully cleaned each of Taemin's injuries, its rough tongue surprisingly gentle against torn flesh. The human stirred once during this process, his eyes opening briefly to stare directly into the creature's golden gaze. For a moment, predator and prey regarded each other in perfect stillness. The human's eyes showed no fear, only confusion and a strange kind of acceptance. Then consciousness faded again, and Taemin's head fell back against the forest floor. The Veil Walker completed its medical work and carefully lifted the human onto its back. Taemin's weight was negligible compared to the creature's strength, but carrying him would require a different kind of movement through the forest. No more leaping between tree branches or scaling vertical cliff faces. The journey would have to follow the ground paths, making it longer and more dangerous as it prepared to leave the clearing. The Guardian took one last look at the alien structure that had drawn the humans to this place. The metal spiral continued to pulse with its mysterious energy, indifferent to the drama that had played out in its shadow. The Veil Walker had never understood the purpose of the ancient artifact, but it had guarded the clearing for decades. Other creatures would continue that watch in its absence. The first steps of the journey were the hardest. Every movement had to be calculated to avoid jarring the injured human. The Veil Walker's natural gait was a flowing sprint that could cover vast distances without tiring. But now it had to adopt an unfamiliar walking pace as they moved deeper into the forest. The creature's enhanced hearing picked up the distant sounds of aircraft. The humans were already searching for their missing team, but they were looking in the wrong direction. Following the path the survey team had taken to reach the clearing, they would not think to search the deep forest where no human had ever ventured. The Veil Walker pressed on through the growing darkness, guided by senses far superior to human technology. It knew every stream, every safe passage, every hidden danger in its domain. If any creature could deliver the wounded human to safety, it was one of the ancient guardians. But as the first night deepened around them, the Guardian wondered if its decision had been wise. It was breaking laws older than human civilization, abandoning duties that had been sacred for centuries, all for a being it barely understood, who might die despite its efforts. Yet when Taemin stirred on its back, murmuring words in a language the Veil Walker did not know, the creature felt something it had never experienced before, a connection that transcended species, a bond forged in the moment when two beings chose compassion over survival. The journey had begun. Dawn brought no relief to the Veil Walker. The ancient creature had traveled through the night without rest, carrying its unconscious burden through terrain that would challenge even the most advanced human vehicles. Its muscles ached from the unfamiliar gait required to keep Timon stable on its back, but it pressed forward with determination born from centuries of endurance. The human stirred as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the dense canopy above. His breathing had grown more labored during the night, and fever had begun to set in. The Veil Walker could smell the infection spreading through his wounds, a scent that triggered ancient instincts about sickness and death. Tamon's eyes opened slowly, focusing with difficulty on the world around him. At first, he thought he was dreaming. The forest floor moved past him at an impossible height, and the rhythm of movement beneath him was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was smooth and flowing, like riding on water rather than walking on solid ground. He tried to speak, but managed only a weak croak. His throat felt like sandpaper, and his entire body burned with pain. The last clear memory he had was the attack in the clearing, watching his teammates fall to the metal-clawed predators. Everything after that was a blur of pain and darkness. The creature beneath him seemed to sense his awakening. A low rumble emanated from its chest, not threatening but somehow comforting. The sound vibrated through its body and into Tamon's, creating a strange sensation of connection. The bioluminescent markings along the creature's spine pulsed brighter for a moment, as if responding to his consciousness. Tay-Min tried to turn his head to see his rescuer better, but the movement sent waves of agony through his injured shoulder. Through his fevered vision, he caught glimpses of golden fur, marked with patterns of blue light. The creature was massive, easily large enough to carry him without strain, but it moved with a grace that seemed impossible for something so large. We're traveling through parts of the forest that no human had ever seen. The trees here were even more ancient than those around the clearing, their trunks twisted into impossible shapes by centuries of growth. Strange plants glowed with their own inner light, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly quality. The Veil Walker navigated this alien landscape with perfect confidence. It knew every safe path through the maze of giant roots and hanging vines. When they encountered a stream too wide to cross easily, the creature found a fallen log that could support their combined weight. When the way ahead was blocked by thorny undergrowth, it took a detour that added distance but avoided the danger to its injured passenger. As the morning progressed, Tamon's condition worsened. The fever made him delirious, and he began to mumble words that made no sense. Sometimes he called out the names of his fallen teammates. Other times he spoke of places and people from his childhood on distant Earth. The Veil Walker listened to these fevered ramblings with growing concern. It had seen fever take many creatures over the years, and it recognized the signs of a mind struggling against infection and trauma. The human needed medicine. But the nearest healing plants were still hours away when they reached a small clearing where sunlight broke through the canopy. The Guardian made its first stop of the journey. It lowered itself carefully to the ground, allowing Tamon to rest on a bed of soft moss. The human's skin was pale and clammy, and his breathing came in short. Painful gasps. The Veil Walker began to search the clearing for the plants it needed. Its species had developed a deep understanding of forest medicine over countless generations. Every Guardian knew which leaves could fight infection, which roots could ease pain, and which flowers could bring down fever. It found what it was looking for. Growing near a small spring, the healing moss that grew here was pale green and felt cool to the touch. When crushed, it released a juice that could slow infection and promote healing. The Veil Walker gathered several handfuls, chewing them into a paste that it could apply to the human's wounds. Returning to Tamon's side, the creature began its work. It carefully removed the makeshift bandages it had applied during the night, revealing wounds that were red and inflamed. The smell of infection was stronger now, but not yet beyond help. Using its rough tongue, the Veil Walker cleaned each wound with gentle precision. The healing paste stung when applied, causing Tamon to cry out weakly, but the Guardian persisted. It had to get the medicine deep into the damaged tissue if there was any hope of stopping the infection. As it worked, the creature found itself studying the human more closely. Timon was smaller than most of the forest's inhabitants. With no natural weapons or armor, his skin was soft and easily damaged, and his body seemed poorly designed for survival in the wilderness. Yet something about him had inspired such fierce loyalty from his packmates, and such desperate courage in the face of impossible odds. The Veil Walker had observed many species over the centuries, but humans remained a mystery. They were physically weak compared to most predators, yet they carried weapons that could kill the largest beasts. They formed strong emotional bonds with their packmates, yet they were also capable of remarkable individual achievement. They were, in many ways, the most contradictory species the Guardian had ever encountered. When the medical treatment was complete, the Veil Walker allowed itself a brief rest. The first day of travel had been more exhausting than expected, and the most difficult terrain still lay ahead. It drank from the spring and ate some of the fruit that grew nearby, building up energy for the challenges to come. Tae-Min regained consciousness briefly during this rest. His fever had broken somewhat, and his vision was clearer. For the first time, he was able to truly see his rescuer. The sight should have terrified him. The Veil Walker was clearly a predator, with sharp teeth and claws that could easily tear him apart. Its golden eyes held an intelligence that was both ancient and alien. Every instinct he possessed as a human should have been screaming danger. Instead, he felt only gratitude and wonder. This magnificent creature had chosen to save him, had carried him through the night when it could have simply let him die. The gentleness with which it had treated his wounds spoke of a compassion that transcended species barriers. He tried to speak, to express his thanks, but only managed to whisper a single word: friend. The Veil Walker tilted its great head, studying him with those remarkable golden eyes. It did not understand the human language, but something in the tone conveyed meaning. The creature's rumbling purr grew louder, and its bioluminescent markings pulsed in what might have been recognition or approval when it was time to continue the journey. The Guardian lifted Tae-Min back onto its shoulders with even greater care than before. The human was still weak, but the fever had lessened, and his breathing was steadier. The healing plants were working, buying them precious time. As they resumed their travels through the deep forest, both beings began to understand that something profound was happening between them. They came from different worlds, different species, different ways of understanding existence. Yet in their shared struggle against death and distance, a bond was forming that neither had expected. The Veil Walker had broken its ancient isolation. To save a stranger, Tae-Min had found kindness in the heart of an alien predator. Together, they continued their race against time, each step taking them further from the world they knew and deeper into a connection that would change them both forever. The first day of their journey was ending, but their story was just beginning. The second day brought storms that tested both the Veil Walker's resolve and Tae-Min's will to survive. Dark clouds had been gathering since dawn, and by midday the first raindrops began to fall through the forest canopy. What started as a gentle shower quickly turned into a torrential downpour that soaked through everything. The Veil Walker pressed on despite the worsening conditions. Its thick fur provided some protection from the rain, but carrying Tae-Min meant it could not seek shelter. In its usual high places among the tree branches, the human was too weak to hold on during the creature's normal climbing movements, so they were forced to stay on the dangerous ground level. Lightning began to flash overhead, illuminating the forest in brief, stark moments of white light. The sound of thunder rolled through the trees like the roar of angry gods. Each flash revealed the twisted shapes of ancient trees and the gleaming eyes of creatures watching from the shadows. Tae-Min drifted in and out of consciousness as the storm raged around them. The fever had returned with a vengeance, making him shake uncontrollably despite the Veil Walker's body heat. In his fevered dreams, he saw his fallen teammates calling to him from the darkness. He heard his mother's voice from his childhood on Earth, telling him stories about brave heroes who never gave up. The rain made everything more difficult for the Veil Walker. The ground became slippery and treacherous, forcing the creature to slow its pace even further. Streams that were normally easy to cross became raging torrents. Paths that had been clear the day before were now blocked by fallen branches and flooding. But the greatest challenge was not the weather itself. It was the effect the storm had on the local wildlife. Many of the forest's predators had been driven from their usual territories by the flooding. They were hungry, displaced, and looking for easy prey. The scent of blood from Tae-Min's wounds was like a beacon in the storm, drawing danger from all directions. The first attack came from above. A pack of tree-dwelling hunters, forced down from their flooded nests, dropped from the branches ahead. They were smaller than the metal-clawed beasts from the clearing, but they moved with deadly speed and hunted in coordinated groups. The Veil Walker had no choice but to fight. It could not outrun the attackers while carrying Timon, and there was no safe place to hide him during a battle. The ancient guardian lowered itself to the ground, allowing the unconscious human to slide off its back into a patch of soft moss. The battle was brief but fierce. The Veil Walker's size and strength gave it a significant advantage, but the pack hunters were desperate and determined. They came from all sides, using their superior numbers to try to overwhelm the guardian. Golden eyes blazed with ancient fury as the Veil Walker defended its charge. Its claws, normally used for climbing and digging, became weapons of devastating efficiency. Its powerful jaws crushed bones with ease. The bioluminescent markings along its spine flared bright blue, a warning display that had terrified forest redditors for centuries. When the fight was over, 5 attackers lay still on the rain-soaked ground. The survivors melted back into the storm, their hunting instincts overruled by the wisdom of self-preservation. The Veil Walker had proven once again why its species was considered the apex predator of the deep forest. But the battle had cost precious time and energy. The guardian was bleeding from several wounds, and its muscles ached from the fierce combat. Worse, the noise of the fight had attracted other predators. The Veil Walker could hear them moving through the forest, drawn by the scent of blood and the promise of easy prey. It gathered Timon back onto its shoulders and resumed the journey. But now, with greater urgency, the storm showed no signs of letting up, and they were still more than a day away from the human settlement. Every hour that passed made the human survival less likely. As they traveled deeper into the night, the Veil Walker began to feel the weight of exhaustion. It had not slept in over 40 hours, and the constant strain of carrying extra weight while navigating treacherous terrain was taking its toll. Its usually perfect balance began to falter, and more than once it stumbled on roots or rocks that it would normally have avoided easily. But giving up was not an option. The guardian had made a promise to itself when it first lifted the dying human onto its back. It would deliver him to safety or die trying. Ancient codes of honor, passed down through generations of Veil Walkers, demanded no less. The storm finally began to weaken near midnight, but by then both travelers were in serious trouble. Timon's condition had worsened dramatically. The combination of infection, blood loss, and exposure to the elements was pushing his body beyond its limits. His breathing was so shallow that sometimes the Veil Walker had to stop and listen carefully to make sure he was still alive. When they came across a deep cave system carved into a hillside, the guardian made the difficult decision to stop for shelter. Every minute of delay reduced their chances of reaching help in time, but continuing through the storm would almost certainly kill them both. The cave was dry and warm, heated by underground springs that ran through the rock. The Veil Walker carried Timon deep into the system. Away from the entrance, where other creatures might seek shelter from the storm, it found a small chamber where they could rest safely until the weather cleared, in the darkness of the cave. Lit only by the guardian's bioluminescent markings, Timon regained consciousness one more time. His fever had broken again, and for a few precious minutes his mind was clear. He found himself looking up at the cave ceiling, feeling the warmth of the creature's body beneath him. He turned his head slowly and saw the Veil Walker watching him. With those incredible golden eyes, the creature looked exhausted. Its fur was matted with rain and blood, and its breathing was labored from the night's exertions. Yet it had never stopped fighting for his survival. With tremendous effort, Timon reached out and touched the creature's massive paw. The contact sent a shock of understanding between them. Human and alien, both wounded, both struggling against impossible odds, both refusing to surrender to despair. The Veil Walker's rumbling perfilled the cave, a sound that seemed to say everything that words could not express. In that moment, they were no longer rescuer and rescued, predator and prey, or even separate species. They were simply two beings who had found something precious in each other, something worth fighting for against all odds. As Timon drifted back into unconsciousness, the guardian settled down for its first rest since the journey began. But, even in sleep, its senses remained alert. ready to defend its new friend against any threat that might emerge from the storm-torn forest. The second day was ending, but their greatest test still lay ahead. The third day dawned with cruel beauty. Sunlight streamed through the cave entrance, painting golden patterns on the stone walls. The storm had passed, leaving the forest washed clean and sparkling with moisture. Birds sang in the distance, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers. It was the kind of morning that should have brought hope, but the Veil Walker knew better. Te-min was dying. The human's breathing had become so shallow that it was barely visible. His skin had taken on a pale, waxy appearance that the Guardian recognized from too many years of watching death claim the creatures of the forest. The infection had spread despite all the healing plants, and his body was losing the fight against trauma and blood loss. The Veil Walker's enhanced hearing could detect aircraft in the distance. Search and rescue teams were scouring the forest, their flying machines creating geometric patterns across the sky as they looked for any sign of the missing survey team. But they were searching in the wrong areas. Following established trails and clearings where humans might logically be found, they would never think to look in the deep forest where no human had ever traveled. The Guardian gathered Taemin onto its back with infinite care, knowing that this might be their final day together. The human settlement was still many hours away, even at the fastest pace the creature could manage. Based on the sounds of the search aircraft, help was probably 12 hours of travel in the opposite direction. The choice was clear. The Veil Walker could either carry its dying friend toward the distant settlement, hoping against hope that they would arrive in time, or it could try to intercept the search teams and somehow signal for help. But the second option would mean abandoning centuries of secrecy and revealing itself to humans who might not understand its intentions. The Guardian made its decision without hesitation. It began to run. What followed was a display of physical prowess that would have been impossible for any normal creature. The Veil Walker pushed its ancient body beyond all reasonable limits, leaping across chasms that would have required careful navigation. The day before, it scaled near vertical cliff faces in seconds. Finding handholds in solid rock with claws evolved for precisely this kind of emergency travel. The bioluminescent markings along its spine began to dim as the creature channeled every ounce of available energy into speed and endurance. Its heart hammered in its chest, and its lungs burned with each breath, but it did not slow down. Behind it, the forest became a blur of green and brown as ancient trees flashed past like fence posts. Tae-min stirred once during this desperate sprint, roused by the rhythm of the Guardian's pounding feet and the rush of air against his face. Through fever-clouded eyes, he saw the world racing past at impossible speed. Trees, rocks, and streams merged into a continuous flow of motion that made no sense to his human perception. He realized what was happening. The creature was killing itself to save him, pouring its life force into one final effort to reach help before time ran out. The knowledge filled him with a mixture of gratitude and guilt that was almost overwhelming with tremendous effort. He managed to speak. His voice was barely a whisper, but somehow the Guardian heard him over the sound of its own labored breathing. "Thank you," he whispered. "My friend?" The Veil Walker's response was a sound unlike any it had made before. It was part purr, part growl, and part something else entirely. A sound that conveyed 3 centuries of solitude, suddenly broken by connection. Ancient wisdom touched by compassion, and the fierce joy of friendship discovered in the most unlikely circumstances. The Guardian's pace increased even further, as if the human's words had given it access to reserves of strength it had not known it possessed. The forest around them became a green tunnel of speed, with only the ground directly ahead. Remaining in focus, they burst through the tree line at the forest's edge, just as the afternoon sun began to sink toward the horizon. The human settlement spread out before them, a collection of prefabricated buildings and landing pads that looked impossibly small and fragile. Compared to the vast wilderness they had just crossed, the Veil Walker could see people moving between the buildings and the bright lights of medical facilities, so close now, close enough that a human voice could carry across the distance. But the Guardian's strength was finally failing. Its legs trembled with exhaustion, and its vision began to blur from the effort of the desperate run. It managed to cover half the distance to the settlement before its body gave out. The creature stumbled and fell, rolling to protect Taman from the impact. They came to rest on a patch of soft grass, just beyond the settlement's perimeter lights. The Veil Walker struggled to its feet and carefully lowered the unconscious human to the ground. Taman was still breathing, but barely. His pulse was weak and irregular, and his skin felt cold to the touch. He had perhaps minutes left, not hours, with the last of its strength. The Guardian lifted its great head and roared. The sound echoed across the settlement like thunder, a call that combined the power of an apex predator with the desperation of a friend watching death approach. It was a sound that would haunt the dreams of everyone who heard it. A voice from the wild places of the world demanding attention and aid. Lights began to appear in the settlement buildings. People emerged from doorways, looking around in confusion and fear. The roar had come from somewhere very close, but they could see nothing in the gathering darkness beyond their security perimeters. The Veil Walker roared again, and this time the sound was answered, not by another creature, but by the wail of emergency sirens and the bright beams of searchlights. The humans had heard the call and were responding. Even if they did not understand what they were responding to, medical teams began to mobilize, their flying vehicles lifting off from the landing pads and heading toward the source of the mysterious sounds. The Guardian watched them approach with golden eyes that reflected the settlement's lights like stars. When the first rescue vehicle appeared overhead, its searchlight illuminating the grass where they lay, the Veil Walker made its final decision. It could not let itself be seen, could not risk the complications that would follow if humans discovered one of the forest's ancient guardians. Its people had remained hidden for good reasons, and one act of compassion could not be allowed to endanger them all. But it could not abandon Taman either. The creature bent down and touched its nose to the human's forehead, a gesture of farewell that transcended species. Then it gathered its remaining strength and bounded back toward the tree line, disappearing into the forest shadows just as the rescue teams landed. The medics found Taman lying alone in the grass, unconscious but alive. Their instruments detected no sign of whatever had brought him to this place, but they had no time to investigate mysteries. They had a life to save. As the medical team worked to stabilize their patient, one of the technicians noticed something strange. Mixed in with the human's blood and the forest debris on his clothing were several golden hairs, longer and thicker than anything in their biological databases. But there was no time to analyze the anomaly. Taman was loaded into the medical transport and rushed to the settlement's emergency facilities, where the real fight for his life would begin. In the forest, the Veil Walker watched the lights of the rescue vehicle disappear into the distance. Its task was complete, its promise kept. The human would live or die now based on his own strength and the skill of his people's healers. The Guardian turned and walked slowly back into the deep forest, its bioluminescent markings flickering weakly in the darkness. It had given everything. It had to save a stranger, and in doing so had discovered something new about itself and its place in the universe. The 3-day journey was over, but its effects would last forever. 3 weeks passed before Taman opened his eyes in the medical facility. The first thing he saw was the white ceiling of the recovery room, followed by the concerned face of Dr. Sujin, the settlement's chief medical officer. Machines beeped softly around his bed, monitoring his vital signs and the complex cocktail of medicines keeping him alive. "Welcome back, Lieutenant," Dr. Sujin said, with a smile that could not quite hide her amazement. "We were not sure you were going to make it." Taman tried to speak, but his throat felt raw and unused. The doctor helped him sip some water, and gradually his voice returned. The first word he managed to whisper was not about his own condition or the fate of his team. "Friend," he said, his eyes searching the room as if expecting to see golden fur and bioluminescent markings. Dr. Sujin frowned. "You were found alone, Lieutenant. The rescue team that brought you in reported no other survivors from your survey mission. I am sorry about your teammates." The memories came flooding back then. The attack in the clearing, watching Hygiene and Borum fall to the metal-clawed predators, the incredible creature that had saved him, carrying him for 3 days through the deepest parts of the forest. The gentle touch of its massive paws, the rumbling purr that had comforted him through the worst of his fever. "There was someone," Taman insisted, struggling to sit up despite the protests of his healing body. "Something saved me. A creature from the forest. It carried me here." war when dealing with patients who might be experiencing hallucinations or trauma-induced delusions. Lieutenant, you were found at the edge of our settlement perimeter. You had been missing for 4 days. The injuries you sustained were severe, and you lost a significant amount of blood, your recovery period. But Taman knew what he had experienced was real. The memories were too vivid, too detailed to be fever dreams. He could still feel the rhythm of the Guardian's movement, still hear the sound of its breathing during the long nights of travel. The connection he had felt with the creature was unlike anything he had ever experienced. "Check my clothes," he said urgently. "There will be fur, golden fur, and there were plants, healing plants, that it used to treat my wounds. Test them against your database. We did find some unusual organic material on your clothing. Plant compounds that do not match any known species in our colonial database. We assumed they were from previously unidentified vegetation you encountered during your ordeal. And the fur. There were some unusual hair samples, yes. But, Lieutenant, we found no evidence of any large creatures in the forest capable of what you describe. Our surveys have been extensive. The largest predators we have identified are the metal-clawed pack hunters, and they are not known for rescue behavior. Golden eyes watching from the shadows. The Veil Walker had chosen to remain hidden, just as it had probably done for centuries. It would not reveal itself to human science or colonial surveys. Over the following days, as his strength returned, Taman told his story to anyone who would listen. Rescue to unknown factors. Most people assumed he had been delirious from his injuries and had somehow managed to crawl to safety on his own. But Dr. Sujin was intrigued by the evidence that could not be explained away. The plant compounds found on his clothing showed remarkable healing properties when analyzed. The hair samples were unlike anything in the colonial biological database, suggesting a species that had never been encountered or catalogued. "If we assume your memories are accurate," she told him during one of their sessions, "the creature you describe would be remarkable. Intelligence comparable to humans, medical knowledge, and the physical capability to traverse the deep forest, while carrying additional weight. Such a being would represent a significant discovery." "It does not want to be discovered," Taman replied. "It saved me because it chose to, not because it wanted contact with humanity. We should respect that choice." Dr. Sujin nodded slowly. "Perhaps you are right, but the story you tell suggests something profound about the nature of intelligence and compassion in the universe. If such beings exist, what does that say about our place here?" Taman had been thinking about that question since his recovery began, and interspecies relationships. It had shown him that wisdom and kindness were not limited to human experience. When he was finally released from medical care, Taman requested permission to return to the forest edge. The settlement's security team escorted him to the perimeter, but would go no further. 30 minutes, Lieutenant," the team leader said. "Any longer, and we come looking for you." Taman nodded and walked alone into the edge of the forest. He found a clearing where the trees opened up to reveal the deeper wilderness beyond. There he unpacked his supplies, arranging them carefully on a flat rock: medicine, food, water purification, tablets, and a small device that could provide light or heat. He sat down to wait, not really expecting anything to happen. But Taman needed to try, needed to show that he remembered and honored what had passed between them. The minutes passed in silence. Birds called in the distance, and insects buzzed around the flowers that grew in the clearing. The forest seemed peaceful and entirely normal, showing no sign of the ancient guardians who watched from its depths. Then, just as he was preparing to leave, he heard it. A sound so soft he almost missed it, carried on the evening breeze. A rumbling purr, distant but unmistakable, of a friendship that transcended species and would never be forgotten. Te-Men smiled and walked back toward the settlement, leaving his offerings where they lay. Behind him, golden eyes watched from the shadows, and bioluminescent markings pulsed once in the gathering darkness before fading away. The story of his rescue spread through the colonial networks. Passed from settlement to settlement across the frontier worlds, most people dismissed it as myth or exaggeration, but others listened with growing wonder. The tale became a symbol of hope in the vast OFTN hostile universe. It spoke of the possibility that intelligence and compassion existed, in forms humanity had never imagined. It suggested that even in the darkest moments, help might come from the most unexpected sources. and it reminded everyone who heard it that courage and kindness were universal languages. The Veil Walker returned to its ancient duties, watching over the deep places where humans did not venture. But it was changed by the experience, carrying within its memory the image of a small, fragile being who had chosen to die for his friends, rather than live for himself. Sometimes, when the wind was right and the night was still, colonists reported hearing strange sounds from the forest, a rumbling that was not quite thunder, a call that seemed to carry both warning and blessing. They named it the Guardian's Voice, and it became part of the growing legend of Verdania Prime. Children born in the settlement grew up with stories of the forest cat who had saved Lieutenant Taman, of the ancient beings who watched over the wilderness with golden eyes and hearts full of wisdom. The stories reminded them that courage could be found in the most unexpected places, and that kindness was a force powerful enough to bridge any gap between worlds. In the deep forest, where the oldest trees grew and the earth itself remembered the first days of the world, the Veil Walker continued its eternal watch. It had touched the life of another species and been touched in return, proving that understanding could bloom between any beings willing to look beyond their differences. The 3-day journey had ended, but the bond forged in those desperate hours would last forever. In the shadows between worlds, where different forms of life learned to recognize the spark of nobility in each other, the legend lived on. And in the hearts of those who heard the story, hope grew a little brighter, and the universe seemed a little less lonely.